In the summer of 1997, a young structural engineer named Dana Rourke was hired to survey a cluster of abandoned adobe homes outside a small town in New Mexico before a developer bulldozed them for a subdivision. She wasn't there to save anything. She was there to sign off on demolition, but she brought a cheap infrared thermometer with her out of habit, and on the second day, standing in the sun-blasted dirt lot at 2 p.m. with the outdoor thermometer reading 104 degrees. She stepped through a broken doorway into the center of one of those old homes and watched. The number on her thermometer dropped nearly 15 degrees in under a minute. No power ran to that property. No pipes, nothing had touched those walls in decades. She stood there long enough that her supervisor radioed to ask if she was lost. She wasn't lost. She was standing inside a machine that had been running quietly on nothing since before her grandparents were born. That story stuck with me because it captures something most people never get to experience: electricity to keep you alive. And if you're the kind of person thinking seriously about land, about getting off the grid, about not being one blackout away from disaster, this is the piece of the puzzle almost nobody hands you. Not solar panels, not a generator. The shape of the house itself. Today, I want to walk you through the Courtyard house, not as a design trend, not as an aesthetic, but as off-grid infrastructure, as a survival system built out of geometry instead of hardware. Because once you understand what these walls are actually doing, you'll never look at a standard suburban box the same way again. Let's start with the obvious question. If you're serious about self-sufficiency, cooling is one of the hardest problems to solve without the grid. Solar can run your fridge, your lights, maybe your well pumped if you size the system right, but air conditioning is a different beast entirely. A central AC unit can draw 3, 4, 5,000 watts continuously through the hottest part of the day, exactly when your solar production is being fought over by every other appliance in the house. And exactly when a heat dome is most likely to also be stressing the regional grid you're trying to leave behind. People spend tens of thousands of dollars oversizing battery banks and panel arrays just to keep a conventional house cool through July. They're throwing money and copper and lithium at a problem that a smarter building shape solves for free. The Courtyard house doesn't need to be cooled because it's built to cool itself. And the mechanism is so simple that once you see it, you can't unsee it. Picture 4 walls, or for small connected structures arranged in a ring around an open square in the middle. Not a courtyard as decoration. A courtyard is engine room. During the day, that open center sits in shade because the surrounding walls block the low morning and evening sun, and the height of the walls throws shadow across the floor through most of the daylight hours. Shaded ground doesn't heat up the way exposed ground does. It stays cooler than the walls around it, cooler than the roof, cooler than the open desert or field or street beyond the wall. Now bring in the second half of the mechanism, the part that actually moves the air. Heat rises. You already know this instinctively. Open a door at the bottom of a stairwell in a hothouse, and you'll feel cool air pooling near the floor, while the top of the stairs feels like an oven. Warm air is lighter, so it climbs. Cool air is heavier, so it sinks and slides in to replace whatever just left. Engineers call this the stack effect, and it's the exact same physics that makes a chimney draw smoke upward or a hot air balloon lift off the ground. In a courtyard house, you build the whole structure to exploit that effect on purpose. Low openings connect the shaded courtyard to the interior rooms, so the cool, heavy air sitting in the courtyard has somewhere to flow into. High openings, vents near the ceiling, clear story windows, a gap under the roofline let the warm air that collects inside the rooms escape upward and out. Warm air leaves through the top. Cool air enters through the bottom. The house breathes on its own, all day, with no fan, no duct, no thermostat, no compressor. Nothing that can burn out or need a part shipped from a warehouse 3 states away. At night, the cycle reverses in your favor again. The thick walls that spent the day absorbing heat slowly release it, but they release most of it outward, into the open sky above the courtyard, where it radiates away into the cool night air instead of soaking into the rooms you're trying to sleep in. By morning, the courtyard has reset. The thermal mass is ready to start the cycle over. This isn't folklore. It's been measured over and over in wildly different climates by researchers who had no reason to care about the political argument I'm about to make. In dry desert climates, field studies on traditional courtyard homes have recorded interior temperatures running anywhere from 5 to over 10 degrees. Fahrenheit below the peak outdoor temperature, purely from shading and the stack effect, with no mechanical assistance at all. In hot, humid climates, the numbers are smaller because the night air doesn't cool off as sharply. But the Courtyard still consistently pulls indoor temperatures down below what a sealed, unshaded structure would experience, and more importantly, it keeps air moving across your skin, which is what actually makes humidity tolerable. Moving air feels cooler even at the same temperature, because it strips the layer of humid, body-warmed air sitting right against you. Now stop and think about what that means for someone trying to actually live off-grid, not just talk about it on a forum. It means your solar array doesn't need to be sized to run an air conditioner through a heat wave. It means your battery bank doesn't need to survive for cloudy days in July while a compressor is drawing power around the clock. It means when the regional grid goes down, and if you've spent any time researching this, you know it will, more and more often, as demand climbs faster than infrastructure gets rebuilt, your home doesn't become a hazard. It doesn't turn into the kind of sealed box that made the news during the Pacific Northwest heat dome a few years back, when people without air conditioning were trapped in structures that had no way to shed heat once the temperature outside climbed past what the building could handle. A courtyard house was never depending on the grid to survive that day. It was built to not need it in the first place. That's the part I want you to sit with, because it changes what off-grid ready actually means. Off-grid isn't just about generating your own power. It's about needing less power to begin with. A courtyard home cuts your single largest seasonal energy drawdown to nearly nothing before you've installed a single solar panel. Every watt you don't need to generate is a watt you don't need to store, and every watt you don't need to store is thousands of dollars you don't need to spend on batteries that degrade, fail, and need replacing anyway. So if this works, and it's been proven to work for thousands of years across cultures that never spoke to each other, courtyard homes show up independently in the deserts of the American Southwest, in the traditional Sihoan compounds of northern China, in the riad houses of North Africa, in the old courtyard dwellings of Spain and Greece and India. Why isn't every off-grid builder doing this already? Here's where I have to be straight with you, because a lot of what's out there online oversells this as some suppressed secret with a villain behind it. The real answer is less dramatic and more useful. It's mostly land, permitting, and habit. Land, because a courtyard house needs room to spread out. You're not stacking square footage vertically into a tight, cheap-to-heat-and-cool cube. You're laying it out horizontally around an open center, which means you need more lot than a standard suburban footprint gives you. On expensive urban or suburban land, that trade doesn't pencil out. You're paying too much per square foot to leave a chunk of your lot open to the sky. But that's exactly why this design belongs on rural and semi-rural acreage, where land is the cheap part of the build and the whole reason you're going off-grid in the first place. If you already own 5 acres, or you're shopping for raw land specifically because you want independence from utilities, the wasted space objection evaporates. An acre of rural land in most parts of the country costs less than a single season of a bad electric bill in some cities. Spreading out isn't a luxury there, it's just how you build. Permitting, because most American zoning was written around a single assumption. One house, in the middle of the lot, surrounded by mandatory setback margins on all 4 sides. That's not a conspiracy against courtyard design. Specifically, it's a leftover from mid-century suburban planning that never anticipated anyone wanting to build differently. But it does mean you can't walk into a permit office, say, "I want a courtyard compound," and expect a smooth conversation. What you can do, and what people successfully do every year, is design it as a primary dwelling plus permitted accessory. Structures, connected by covered walkways, arranged around a shared shaded center. On paper, to the county, it's a house and its outbuildings. In practice, standing in it, it's a courtyard home, doing exactly what courtyard homes have always done. You're not breaking a rule. You're building within one that was never written to anticipate you. And habit, because most contractors, most architects, most lenders have simply never built or financed one of these, and the mortgage and appraisal system runs on comparable recent sales. If nothing like your house has sold nearby, an appraiser has nothing to compare it to, and that makes financing harder. Not impossible, but harder. Which is exactly why so many people who go this route are building with cash. With owner-financed land, or with a construction loan tied to acreage rather than a standard suburban comp, that's a real obstacle. It's just not a mysterious one, and it's one that off-grid buyers are often already navigating anyway, since raw rural land rarely appraises the same way a subdivision lot does. So let's talk about how you'd actually do this. If you're someone sitting on land right now, or shopping for it, and you want a home that keeps you cool without a single kilowatt spent doing it, start with orientation, because it costs you nothing and it matters more than almost any other decision. Run the long axis of your courtyard east to west, not north to south. Research on courtyard orientation consistently shows this cuts the amount of direct solar heat gain hitting your walls and courtyard floor compared to a north-south layout. Place your main entrance and your primary openings toward the direction your prevailing summer breeze comes from. In a lot of the American Southwest and Midwest, that's roughly southeast in summer. Get this wrong on the drawings, and you've thrown away a huge share of your natural ventilation before construction even starts. Get it right, and it costs you nothing but one conversation with whoever's drafting your plans. Next, size the courtyard correctly for your climate. This is where people get it backwards. A courtyard that's too wide and too shallow stops acting like a shaded well and starts acting like a sun-collecting pit. Studies out of hot, arid regions have specifically found that oversized, poorly shaded courtyards can actually raise daytime temperatures instead of lowering them. You want it narrower and deeper, so the surrounding walls keep it in genuine shadow through most of the day, not wide open to direct overhead sun. If you're in a colder climate with real winters, shrink the courtyard further still. Since a smaller enclosed court traps a still, sun-warmed pocket of air that helps you in January, the same way a bigger one helps you in July. Match your wall strategy to your actual climate, not to a photo of an adobe house in Arizona. In dry, low-humidity regions, thick thermal mass, rammed earth, adobe thick block. Insulated masonry is your best friend because it soaks up heat slowly during the day and releases it into the cool night air after you've gone to bed. In humid climates, that same thermal mass becomes a liability because the night air never cools off enough to pull the stored heat back out, and you end up sleeping next to a wall that's still radiating the afternoon's heat at 11 p.m. in humid regions. Lean harder into shade, cross ventilation, and lighter, more breathable construction instead of heavy mass. Don't forget drainage. An open center means rain falls directly into your living space, and traditional builders across every culture that used this design solved it the same way, by sloping the courtyard floor toward a drain or a collection basin, sometimes turning the whole courtyard into a rainwater harvesting surface, which, if you're serious about self-sufficiency, is a second win stacked on top of the cooling. You're not just managing water, you're catching it, and build low openings and high openings deliberately. This is the actual engine, and it's the part people skip because it's less visually dramatic than the courtyard itself. Vents or windows low on the wall facing the courtyard let the cool, heavy air in. Vents clear storied windows or gaps under the roofline up high let the warm air escape. Without both, you don't have a stack effect. You just have a nice-looking shaded patio. I want to be honest about the limits too, because overselling this does nobody any good. A courtyard alone will not hold a bone-chilling 68 degrees through the single worst, most humid hour of an August heat wave. What it does, reliably, in every climate it's been studied in, is cut the total cooling load your home experiences by a massive margin, often enough that a single ceiling fan, a small window unit, run for an hour at the peak of the day, or a tiny solar-powered swamp cooler in dry climates finishes the last small stretch that used to require a roaring, grid-hungry central air system running around the clock. For an off-grid setup, that difference is everything. It's the difference between a solar and battery system sized for a mansion's worth of air conditioning, and one sized for a fan and a laptop. Think about what that actually means in dollars if you're planning a build. A conventional off-grid home in a hot climate often needs its battery bank and solar array oversized specifically to survive. AC loads during peak summer, that's frequently the single biggest line item driving the total system cost upward, sometimes by tens of thousands of dollars. Take that load away, or shrink it, down to a fan and a small swamp cooler, and your entire power system gets smaller, cheaper, and more forgiving of a few cloudy days in a row. You're not just saving on a mortgage payment or an electric bill you no longer have. You're saving on the very infrastructure of independence itself. And then there's the scenario that, if you're drawn to this way of living, you've probably already pictured. It's the middle of the worst heat wave of the year. The regional grid is straining, rolling blackouts are hitting towns an hour away, and every neighbor with a conventional home and a financed heat pump is sitting in the dark, sweating, waiting for the power company's app to tell them when relief is coming. You're not waiting on anything. You're standing in the shaded center of your own home, air moving across your skin because the shape of your walls is pulling it there, exactly the way it was pulling it there before sunrise, and exactly the way it'll keep pulling it there after sunset, with or without a grid connection 100 miles away. Nothing is running, nothing can fail, because there's nothing to fail. The heat is leaving through the top of your house the same way it's left courtyard homes for 5,000 years. The cool is coming in low, and it doesn't check the weather app first. That's not a fantasy. That's just physics, applied on purpose, by people who understood, long before anyone had a word for electricity, that the smartest way to survive a hot climate is to build a house shaped like the answer. Instead of a house that needs a machine bolted to the side of it to survive its own design. If you're serious about land and self-sufficiency, this is the piece worth putting time into before you ever price out a solar array. The shape of the building itself. Get the shape right, and everything downstream, your power needs, your battery sizing, your dependence on the grid you're trying to leave, gets smaller and simpler. Get it wrong, and you'll spend the next decade throwing hardware at a problem your walls should have solved on day one. If this was useful, stick around, because next I want to walk through the water side of self-sufficiency. How the same old builders who figured out passive cooling also figured out how to catch, store, and cool water without a single pump, and how you can fold that straight into the same courtyard design instead of building it as a separate system. Let me know in the comments where you're looking at land, and what climate you're building for. I read every one, and it shapes what I cover next.